The hearing room buzzed like a hornet's nest. Cameras lined the walls, flashing red lights in every corner as lawmakers leaned into their microphones, eager to score their next viral moment. Papers shuffled, voices overlapped, and somewhere in the chaos, a smirk cut through the noise like a blade. Nancy Mace tilted her head, her words dripping with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing every lens is on you. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed fixed forward, steady, focused, unbothered. The Texas Congresswoman had seen storms before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just another hearing, it was a performance, a test of patience disguised as policy. Mace leaned in again, her tone playful but cruel, the kind of mockery that travels far beyond the walls of Capitol Hill. Laughter from a few corners broke out, short and nervous. The rest of the room froze, waiting for Crockett's reaction. For a long second, silence stretched thin. You could almost hear the hum of the air conditioning. The tension became a living thing, pulsing between two women, separated by ideology, experience, and something deeper, respect. Crockett's fingers brushed the edge of her papers, not to fidget, but to hold her composure. Every instinct screamed to answer fire with fire. But she had learned something long ago, that power isn't in the volume of your voice. It's in how long the echo lasts after you've spoken. Mace smirked again, leaning back, confident she'd won the moment. The crowd of onlookers didn't see what Crockett saw, a woman mistaking noise for strength. Crockett's lips curved just slightly, not into a smile, but into the calm before impact. In a room full of noise, she began, her tone measured, unwavering. One woman answered arrogance with a single line that silenced the nation. The words hadn't even fully landed before the room went still. Reporters stopped typing. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, uncertain whether to blink. In that instant, Crockett's restraint became her weapon, her composure, her rebellion. And as the echoes faded beneath the marble ceiling, one truth lingered in every mind watching. Something had shifted. But to understand how one sentence shook Congress, you need to know the fire that built Jasmine Crockett. This wasn't just another congressional hearing. It was the kind of day where the air inside the chamber felt charged, like the nation itself was holding its breath. The topic on paper was procedural, routine, forgettable. But underneath the parliamentary language and the polite nods, something raw simmered, a clash of identity, respect, and unspoken power. For years, Capitol Hill had been built on a choreography of control. Raise your hand, wait for your turn, smile when interrupted, pretend that dignity and silence are the same thing. It's a ritual most women in politics learn early, especially women of color. Jasmine Crockett had mastered it. She knew the rhythm of the interruptions, the coded phrases of dismissal, the way certain colleagues used decorum as both shield and weapon. But that day, the mask of civility was cracking. The conversation wasn't really about legislation. It was about who gets to be heard, who gets to define what respect looks like. And when Nancy Mace took her seat that morning, she carried with her a quiet resentment that had been building for months. She was sharp, ambitious, and tired of feeling overshadowed. When the debate began, Mace's questions weren't just policy points. They were performances. Every barb disguised as inquiry, every smirk aimed at a woman who refused to shrink. Crockett answered each one with calm precision, never losing her footing. The contrast became a silent story within the spectacle. One woman feeding on chaos, another rising above it. Outside the chamber, the country was restless. Social media burned with arguments about representation, race, and tone. Millions were watching, scrolling, replaying every snippet that leaked from the room. Some saw a bold black congresswoman standing her ground. Others saw what they always see, a woman who dared to be firm and was called angry for it. That tension didn't stay online. It seeped into the hearing itself, invisible but palpable. You could see it in the way staffers exchanged nervous glances, in the measured tones of colleagues suddenly aware they were part of something bigger than procedure. Every word now carried a weight that felt cultural, not just political. Mace, sensing the spotlight, leaned harder into provocation. The glint in her eyes said she was enjoying it. The game, the reaction, the theater. But Crockett had seen that glint before, in courtrooms, in campaigns, in life. She knew the kind of arrogance that confuses confidence for dominance, and she also knew how quickly that arrogance turns brittle. There was something poetic in the setting, a chamber meant to embody democracy, now serving as a mirror for its fractures. The microphones weren't just recording voices, they were recording history. Every pause, every raised eyebrow, every understated rebuttal was writing a script the nation didn't know it was watching. And in that script, Crockett wasn't just a participant. She was the test of patience, of grace, of what it means to carry centuries of restraint into a single televised moment. By the time Mace interrupted her again, the audience, inside and outside the room, could feel it. The line between debate and disrespect had begun to blur. The smirks grew sharper, the interruptions longer, the crowd quieter. The storm was forming, silent but sure, and neither woman could stop what was coming next. And when Nancy Mace decided to cross that line, she had no idea what kind of storm she was stepping into. Nancy Mace had always known how to own a room. From the moment she first stepped into politics, she understood that confidence could be currency, and she spent it lavishly. The cameras liked her. The headlines called her refreshing, bold, fearless. She smiled through every interview with the precision of someone who'd practiced in the mirror 1,000 times. For a while, it worked. Every quip, every clever retort built her brand. Part rebel, part insider, the kind of figure who could throw a punch without ever raising her voice. But behind the polish, something restless stirred. Politics rewards attention, and Mace had learned to chase it like oxygen. Her staff often joked that she could sense when a camera turned her way. In truth, she didn't just crave the lens, she needed it. Each viral clip, each tweet, each headline wasn't just exposure, it was validation. Proof that she mattered. Proof that she could outtalk, outshine, and outlast anyone. That drive came from somewhere deeper. Growing up in South Carolina, she'd been underestimated, told she was too fragile for the rough world of politics. Her early victories had been survival disguised as ambition. She wore her resilience like armor, and soon the armor became her skin. But somewhere along the way, ambition blurred into arrogance. The applause she once earned became applause she demanded. Colleagues whispered about her behind closed doors. How she could turn charming one minute and cutting the next. How she smiled through a compliment that felt like a veiled threat. How she seemed to care less about consensus and more about conquest. Yet even her critics admitted one thing. Nancy Mace was brilliant at playing to the crowd. She studied sound bites the way others studied policy. Every word was calculated for impact. Every pause choreographed for the cameras. But that mastery came at a cost. The more she tried to control her image, the more fragile it became. Whenever someone, especially a woman, stood unbothered in her presence, it rattled her in ways she couldn't explain. It reminded her that charm without authenticity is like a spark without fuel, bright but fleeting. By the time she crossed paths with Jasmine Crockett, Mace was already feeling the tremors of losing her narrative. The headlines that once called her fearless now hinted at divisive. Her jokes, once sharp, now came off as mean-spirited. Even allies began to wince when she spoke over someone, but Mace couldn't stop. The louder the criticism grew, the louder she spoke. She told herself it was confidence, refusing to back down, refusing to apologize. But deep down, she knew it was fear. Fear that her spotlight was fading. Fear that authenticity, something she couldn't rehearse, was starting to matter more than performance. When the committee hearing was announced, she saw opportunity, cameras, a national audience, another chance to reclaim her edge. She planned her remarks carefully, rehearsing every barb to land just right. Her advisors warned her to stay measured, to avoid seeming personal. She laughed them off. People don't remember policies, she said. They remember moments. In her mind, Crockett was just another rival to spar with. Articulate, yes, but predictable. Mace had seen dozens like her. She expected fire, maybe outrage. What she didn't expect was composure. What she didn't plan for was grace. That day, as Crockett calmly answered each jab, something in Mace cracked. Every unbothered response felt like a mirror held up to her insecurities. It wasn't supposed to go like this. The crowd was supposed to laugh with her, not at her. The headlines were supposed to be hers, not someone else's. So she pushed harder. Her tone sharpened, her smile tightened. Every line she delivered carried the bitterness of someone losing control in real time. The room could feel it, the shift from confidence to condescension, from performance to panic. And when she threw that final remark, the one meant to sting, to dominate, to reclaim her moment, it wasn't strategy, it was desperation, the kind of impulsive cruelty that comes when pride drowns judgment. For a heartbeat, she believed she'd won. She leaned back in her chair, satisfied, already imagining the replay on cable news. But victory built on arrogance always trembles before the fall. And somewhere across the table, Jasmine Crockett met her gaze, calm, unshaken, almost pitying. It was the look of someone who'd been here before, who'd faced worse, who knew that silence can be louder than any insult. But while Mace sharpened her words for battle, Crockett had been sharpening something far more powerful, her truth. Before Jasmine Crockett's Crockett's voice ever echoed through the halls of Congress. It carried through far humbler rooms, church basements, classrooms, and crowded community centers, where the air smelled of hard work and hope. She was raised in the rhythm of ordinary struggle, surrounded by people who measured wealth not in dollars, but in dignity. Her parents didn't talk about politics much. They talked about perseverance, about how to keep your head high when life keeps its boot on your neck. As a child, Jasmine absorbed those lessons in silence. She learned to listen before she spoke, to think before she reacted, and to stand her ground without shouting. It wasn't weakness, it was wisdom, the kind that comes from watching strength wear humility like armor. Her early years were marked by moments the world rarely applauds. Late-night study sessions after long shifts. The ache of being told you're too much by those who couldn't see her potential. Professors who mistook confidence for attitude. Employers who mistook intellect for threat. Each encounter left a mark, but also lit a spark. Law school sharpened her mind, but life sharpened her purpose. She didn't enter the courtroom to play the part of a polished professional. She entered to defend those who never got a chance to speak. She represented clients who couldn't afford hope, people society labeled as problems instead of humans. When she stood before a judge, it wasn't just her client's dignity she was defending. It was her own right to exist without apology. The more she won, the less they liked her winning. Her voice carried a calm defiance that unnerved people who equated power with pedigree. But Crockett never adjusted her tone to make others comfortable. She had seen too much to play small. She'd watched friends turned away for the color of their skin, watched truth twisted to fit the powerful, and watched silence mistaken for agreement. Every case she fought, every insult she endured, became part of the steel in her spine. That steel would one day carry her into Congress. When she decided to run for office, few believed she could win. The establishment didn't see her as one of them. They said she lacked polish, that she was too raw, too outspoken, too real. But she wore those words like medals. They only proved she was exactly what her district needed. Someone who didn't come from power, but from the people who'd been ignored by it. Her campaign was built on truth, not theatrics. She didn't have corporate donors or slick consultants. She had volunteers who believed. The same women who had been silenced at work, the same young men written off by the system. They knocked on doors for her. They printed flyers at kitchen tables. They believed in her because she reminded them of themselves, unpolished, unbought, unstoppable. When she finally took the oath of office, she carried their hopes with her. But Congress was no easier than the courtroom. The interruptions came faster, the condescension sharper. Her calmness, once seen as grace, was now treated as defiance. Colleagues tried to test her, bait her, dismiss her. But Jasmine had learned long ago that composure is power. In every meeting, in every exchange, she carried herself like a woman who refused to be reduced. When others raised their voices, she lowered hers. When others performed for cameras, she spoke for those who had none. There was a quiet poetry in her patience, a deliberate choice to let her words cut not through volume but through truth. And yet, behind that calm exterior lived a relentless fire. Each time someone talked over her, she remembered every teacher who doubted her. Every courtroom where her words were dismissed. Every time someone rolled their eyes when she spoke, she thought of the generations of women before her who never even got the chance to speak. That's what steadied her hands that day in the hearing. When Nancy Mace smirked across the table, Crockett didn't see a rival. She saw a reflection of every challenge she'd already conquered. Arrogance masquerading as confidence, privilege dressed up as expertise. It wasn't new, it wasn't special. It was just another reminder of why she was there. For Jasmine, politics had never been about fame or revenge. It was about justice. It was about dignity. It was about proving that calm could be revolutionary, that silence could be strategic, that sometimes the loudest thing you can do is refuse to lose your grace. She didn't plan for the moment that would make her viral. She wasn't chasing it. But when the cameras rolled, something inside her shifted. Years of restraint, composure, and quiet fury aligned into perfect focus. The world was about to see not the attorney, not the congresswoman, but the culmination of everything she had ever stood for. A woman who could turn centuries of dismissal into one unforgettable moment of power. And when the cameras rolled that day, all those years of restraint were about to meet one moment of pure clarity. The hearing room was thick with tension, the kind that hums just beneath polite smiles and polished sound bites. Cameras lined the back wall, lenses glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. Every seat was filled, every face watched for a spark. It wasn't supposed to be a battle, at least not on paper, but everyone in that chamber could feel it coming. Nancy Mace sat forward in her chair, a practiced smirk playing on her lips. She had been here before, the sharp-tongued disruptor, the master of the cutting remark. Her allies whispered encouragement. Her staffers watched eagerly. She had come ready to perform, not deliberate. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett sat in quiet contrast. Her notes were neatly aligned, her posture calm, her gaze unwavering. She didn't interrupt. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply listened. And that, more than anything, seemed to infuriate Mace. The exchange began as routine, a procedural disagreement about funding and oversight. But beneath the policy jargon, something else crackled. It wasn't about facts anymore. It was about dominance. Mace leaned forward, her voice slicing through the air. "So, Congresswoman, are we here to talk about real issues, or just to listen to another lecture about your feelings?" The jab drew a few chuckles from the backbenches. Cameras zoomed in. Crockett's eyes didn't flinch. For a moment, the room felt suspended, a single beat of silence that made everyone shift in their seats. Then Mace continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "You know, some of us actually work for a living instead of performing outrage for social media." It was the kind of line designed to sting, to bait. It worked on most people, but Jasmine Crockett was not most people. She adjusted her microphone slightly but said nothing. Instead, she waited. That silence, deliberate and controlled, stretched like a wire pulled taut. You could feel the tension hum through the room. Mace, growing impatient, pressed harder. "What's wrong, Congresswoman?" No clever comeback. "Or are you just used to being wrong?" There it was. The arrogance, the dismissal, the entitlement that so often hides behind political decorum. The chamber murmured. Even those on Mace's side began to shift uncomfortably. Still, Crockett didn't take the bait. Her eyes stayed steady, her breathing even. She was studying Mace, not with anger, but with precision, like a surgeon waiting for the exact moment to make the first cut. Then came the final push. "You know," Mace said with a half smile, "some of us are here to lead, not to play the victim." The words landed like a slap. For a moment, the cameras caught it, the faint flicker behind Jasmine's eyes. Not fury, not fear, but a memory. Every boardroom, every courtroom, every conversation where competence was questioned and composure mistaken for weakness. She leaned slightly forward, her voice calm but resonant. "Are you finished?" Mace laughed, thinking she'd won the moment. But Crockett wasn't asking for permission. She was reclaiming the floor. The moderator hesitated, sensing the storm about to break. Staffers glanced at one another. Phones started recording. Jasmine adjusted her papers, took one calm breath, and finally looked up. The tone of the room shifted instantly. Gone was the chatter. Gone was the smug laughter. There was something in her stillness, the kind of authority that doesn't shout. It simply commands. Even Mace, for a split second, faltered. The smirk faded. The cameras zoomed closer. Jasmine's voice, when it came, was measured and clear. Every word deliberate, every syllable anchored in quiet power. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't point a finger. She simply spoke the truth. And in doing so, she flipped the entire energy of the hearing. The audience watching from home didn't blink. The clip, barely 10 seconds long, would later explode across social media. Replayed millions of times, analyzed frame by frame. But in that moment, no one knew what was coming. The chaos, the arrogance, the baiting, all of it had built to this one breath. And then, with one calm breath, Jasmine looked up and delivered a line that would echo through every corner of America. The silence before the strike was almost sacred. You could hear the hum of the cameras, the faint rustle of paper, the sharp inhale of staffers who suddenly realized they were witnessing something they'd be replaying for years. Jasmine Crockett didn't rush. She didn't need to. Power, real power, doesn't sprint. It walks in steady, deliberate steps. Nancy Mace sat across from her, still smirking, still convinced she was in control. That smirk, polished, practiced, had gotten her through countless interviews and hearings. It was her armor. But this time, that armor was about to crack. Crockett's gaze didn't waver. Her voice, when it came, was soft, almost too soft for the microphones at first, but every syllable carried weight. "You know, Congresswoman," she began, pausing just long enough to make everyone lean in, "some of us don't have to act superior. We just are." It landed like a thunderclap in a church. The words sliced clean through the chamber's tension, elegant and final. No insult, no profanity, no theatrics, just precision. The kind of precision that doesn't just win an argument, it ends one. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No cough, no shuffle, not even a whisper. Mace blinked twice, as if she hadn't heard it correctly. The smirk faltered, replaced by something unguarded, almost human. Shock. Around the table, reactions rippled in silence. One congressman tilted his head, lips curling into the faintest grin. Another quickly hid a smile behind her nose. Staffers tried to keep straight faces, eyes darting down to avoid cameras. But the energy, that uncontainable current, was already in the air. And then, slowly, the room exhaled. It wasn't applause, but it felt like it. The kind of collective exhale that comes when someone finally says the thing everyone else has been too afraid to say. Mace tried to recover, clearing her throat, leaning forward as if to retake the narrative. But it was too late. The balance had shifted. The predator had become the prey, not because of volume, but because of grace. The clip would later be slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. Mace's eyes narrowing, Crockett's calm stare, the half-second of silence that made America lean closer to its screens. Social media would name it instantly, the one-line takedown. But in that chamber, it was still unfolding in real time. Crockett didn't gloat, she didn't smile, she just sat back, hands folded, gaze steady. That restraint, that refusal to chase applause, made the moment even more devastating. Behind her, one aide pressed their lips together, fighting back a grin. Across the aisle, another mouthed something that looked suspiciously like, "Damn!" Mace shifted in her chair, reaching for her water, trying to buy a few seconds of composure. But the silence around her wasn't mercy, it was judgment. Every camera, every set of eyes was waiting to see how she'd respond. "Excuse me?" she finally said, voice strained, her confidence suddenly paper-thin. Crockett didn't flinch. "You heard me," she replied evenly. No anger, no mockery, just truth, and the certainty of someone who's fought harder battles in quieter rooms. That was the difference between them. Mace played politics like performance. Crockett lived it like survival, and that was what the country felt, even before they could name it. That difference between privilege and perseverance, between confidence inherited and confidence earned. The committee chair cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to steer the hearing back to order. "Let's, proceed," he mumbled, though even he looked shaken. His gavel struck the desk once, but it sounded hollow, ceremonial. The real authority in the room no longer came from the chair. It came from Jasmine. As discussion stumbled on, Crockett sat in quiet poise. Her expression said everything. "I said my piece. I don't need to say it twice." The cameras loved her for it. The viewers too. Across the country, phones buzzed with notifications. Clips uploaded, captions added, tweets written mid-broadcast. She ended her with one line, pure elegance. Jasmine Crockett, remember the name. Back in the hearing, Mace attempted to re-enter the debate, her tone brittle. "I don't think personal attacks have any place here," she said, her voice trembling on the edge of control. Crockett raised an eyebrow, not in mockery, but in silent irony. The kind that said, "You started this, and now you want civility?" That look alone sent waves through the internet hours later. Screenshots, GIFs, slow motion edits, a masterclass in composure and quiet dominance. And still, Jasmine said nothing more, because she didn't have to. Sometimes the loudest statement is knowing when to stop talking. As the hearing dragged toward its close, the mood never fully recovered. Mace's voice grew smaller, more defensive. The same colleagues who chuckled earlier now avoided eye contact. The performance had turned into exposure, and she knew it. Meanwhile, Crockett's composure radiated through the room, calm, measured, unbothered. She wasn't basking in victory, she was embodying it. Outside, reporters were already gathering in the hallway, refreshing social feeds, ready to corner whoever emerged first. And when Jasmine finally stepped out, she didn't rush. She paused for a moment, that same quiet confidence, and offered only one sentence to the cameras. "Respect," she said, "goes both ways. It wasn't planned, it wasn't rehearsed, but it landed like a second strike, sealing the moment in history." By the time she returned to her office, her phone was already blowing up texts, mentions, news alerts. A friend had sent her a clip with the caption, "You didn't just win a debate, you changed the tone." She watched it once, then set the phone down. Her eyes closed for a second, not from pride, but relief, because behind every calm rebuttal was a lifetime of holding composure when others would have cracked. That's what the country didn't see. The years of practice it took to stay steady, when dismissed, interrupted, underestimated. The way every too loud, every too emotional, every too much had become fuel for that one perfect moment of control. In the chamber, Mace remained behind, pretending to shuffle papers, trying to compose a face that could hide the loss. But the damage was done. Every political commentator would spend the next week replaying the moment, the one where her arrogance met its limit. And across America, millions of women, especially women who had ever been talked over, written off, or underestimated, felt a quiet satisfaction bloom in their chests, not because it was cruel, but because it was fair. For once, composure had triumphed over condescension. And as the nation shared the clip, captioned, memed, celebrated, one truth became undeniable. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just silenced a rival. She had redefined the sound of authority. But what happened next would prove this was more than just a viral clip. It was a turning point in how America listens to women who fight back. It started as a clip, 12 seconds, grainy audio, committee room lighting. But in the digital age, that's all it takes to spark a wildfire. Within an hour, Twitter was ablaze. Someone had uploaded it with the caption, "Jasmine Crockett just ended Nancy Mace with one line." The views ticked up so fast it was almost cinematic. 10,000, 100,000, a million. By sunset, the clip was everywhere. On TikTok, creators reenacted the exchange with dramatic music. Some of us don't have to act superior. We just are. Cut, beat, drop, freeze, frame. The line was remixed into songs, edited into highlight reels, even auto-tuned into a viral sound. #1 within hours, followed by Power in Poise. The algorithms couldn't keep up. Twitter became a digital battlefield. One side called it a masterclass in composure. Another labeled it performative arrogance. But amid the noise, a quieter current emerged. Pride. Black women, especially, filled timelines with messages that pulsed with validation. We've all been in that room before. She didn't raise her voice once and still made history. By morning, news outlets caught up. CNN ran the headline, "Crockett's calm strikes a nerve." MSNBC invited commentators to discuss the new face of political grace. Even conservative pundits, usually quick to dismiss, found themselves grudgingly respectful. "You can't teach that kind of voice," one admitted on air. Late-night hosts jumped in, their monologues cutting but admiring. "That line wasn't just a clapback," one joked. "It was a verbal exorcism." The audience roared. The meme economy flourished. Someone designed t-shirts within 24 hours, bold black font on white cotton. "We just are." And yet, underneath the humor and virality, something deeper stirred. Students in classrooms replayed the moment during civics lessons. Professors used it to discuss gender dynamics in leadership. Church leaders quoted it in sermons about dignity and restraint. It became a shorthand for balance, the ability to fight without fury, to win without shouting. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, stayed silent online. No victory lap, no thread, just a single post, a still image from the hearing. Her looking forward, calm as ever, with the caption, "Grace is louder than ego." It hit harder than any viral joke. Nancy Mace, on the other hand, faced the opposite current. Reporters hounded her for comment. Her team released a short statement about respecting all colleagues, but the internet had already moved past sympathy. The memes were merciless. Split screens of her smirk before and her silence after, tagged with captions like "when confidence meets composure." Political insiders whispered about the optics disaster, but this wasn't just about optics anymore. It was about resonance. The clip wasn't surviving because it was funny. It was surviving because it was felt. People recognized themselves in it. The worker holding back tears in a meeting. The student ignored until she spoke up. The mother told to calm down. Crockett had spoken for them, not with volume, but with control. That was the secret. She didn't explode. She exposed. Talk shows turned the moment into analysis. "Why did this hit so hard?" one host asked. A cultural critic replied, "Because it wasn't just about politics. It was about power and how we define it." The audience clapped not for the soundbite, but for the truth. Soon, journalists began writing op-eds calling it a cultural reset. Others dubbed it the Crockett Doctrine, the art of disarming arrogance with dignity. Her composure became a case study in modern political presence. But for all the media frenzy, for all the hashtags and talk show laughs, the heart of it remained simple. One woman refused to be rattled, and that calmness spoke louder than every microphone in that room combined. Weeks later, as the noise began to fade, the clip was still circulating. Not as gossip, but as inspiration. Parents showed it to their daughters. Mentors used it in leadership seminars. It transcended the moment that birthed it. Because every so often, a sentence becomes more than just words. It becomes a mirror. For America, this was one of those sentences. It reminded the loudest voices that volume isn't victory. It reminded the underestimated that silence can strike harder than sound. And it reminded the watching world that grace, when wielded with precision, can humble the proud. Yet behind the viral fame, a deeper question began to rise. What does dignity look like in an age of spectacle? Days later, the headlines cooled, the memes began to fade, and the nation returned to its usual rhythm. But something about that hearing, that one moment of unshaken composure, lingered in the collective memory. It was as if Jasmine Crockett had reached through the noise of politics and reminded people of something we'd almost forgotten. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Crockett never claimed victory. When asked about the viral clip during an interview, she smiled softly, choosing her words with the same precision she'd shown in the chamber. "It wasn't about putting someone in their place," she said. "It was about reminding them and reminding myself that I already know mine." That line struck deeper than any headline. It reframed the narrative entirely. What the world had called a takedown, she called self-respect. What some labeled sass, she defined as discipline. The world wanted a fight. She had offered grace, and that was the lesson that began to ripple far beyond Washington. In offices across America, people replayed that moment before walking into tense meetings. Teachers showed it to students learning to speak up without shouting down. Daughters sent it to their mothers with captions like, "You taught me this," because in Crockett's restraint, they saw a mirror of every moment they'd been dismissed, interrupted, or underestimated, and chose to rise instead of react. Crockett became a symbol not just of defiance, but of control. The kind of control that doesn't come from power, but from purpose. She didn't just win an argument, she demonstrated a new kind of strength. One that said, you don't have to match disrespect with noise. You can dismantle it with presence. And maybe that's what people had been craving all along. Not louder voices, but stronger ones. Not spectacle, but substance. Because dignity isn't passive, it's active. It's the decision, moment after moment, to meet chaos with calm, insult with insight, and arrogance with assurance. It's knowing who you are so clearly that no one else's noise can rewrite it. Crockett's poise had done what speeches and slogans rarely could. It redefined what power looks like. Not polished talking points, not viral aggression, but unshakable self-respect. In that stillness, she gave millions of viewers permission to believe that staying composed isn't weakness, it's strategy. And as her words echoed through the culture, from dinner tables to debate stages, a quiet transformation began. The idea of leadership shifted just slightly toward something truer, something earned, not performed. When asked what she'd say to those who called it just another viral moment, Crockett paused. "Moments fade," she said, "but what they reveal, that's the part that lasts." Maybe that's why the clip still mattered long after the laughter stopped. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about humanity. The constant tug between ego and empathy, noise and meaning, pride and peace. Because in the end, the story of Jasmine Crockett and Nancy Mace wasn't just a clash between two congresswomen. It was a parable about power itself. How true strength doesn't shout to be heard. It stands so firmly that silence does the talking. And when history looks back on that hearing, it won't remember who interrupted first or who smirked last. It will remember the stillness, the look of calm in a storm of arrogance, the way one woman turned restraint into revolution. And as the noise faded, one truth remained. Respect isn't given, it's commanded through grace. America watched in shock, not because of chaos, not because of scandal, but because, for once, calm conquered noise. In a chamber built on ego and interruption, Jasmine Crockett proved that grace could still command a room. Her words didn't just silence arrogance, they awakened something deeper. A reminder that dignity still has a place in public life. For so long, politics has rewarded the loudest voices, the sharpest insults, the biggest spectacles. But that day, something shifted. Crockett didn't win by shouting over anyone. She won by refusing to lower herself. And that's why the world stopped scrolling. That's why millions replayed her one line. Because in an age of chaos, composure is revolutionary. It wasn't just a viral moment, it was proof. Proof that character still counts. Proof that intelligence still matters. Proof that self-respect is still power. So when people ask why this moment went global, the answer is simple. It reminded us of who we could be when we refused to meet disrespect on its level. It reminded us that true leadership isn't about control, it's about conviction. And maybe that's why you're still here, watching, reflecting, feeling that quiet fire inside you. Because deep down, you know this wasn't just about a politician. It was about every person who's ever been underestimated, every voice told to sit down, every heart that chose grace over rage. If you believe grace still belongs in power, hit subscribe. Because voices like hers remind us, dignity always speaks louder.